Downton Abbey is now in its 5th season on Australian TV. Set a century ago, it follows the lives of Lord Grantham, his wife and 3 daughters, and their staff below stairs, through social change wrought by war, technology, economy and culture. In the 4th season, the unlucky in love middle daughter, Lady Edith, played by Laura Carmichael, is first left at the altar by her fiancé and then has a liaison with a journalist who goes missing as she discovers she is pregnant. With no support from the father and her unsuspecting family, she fears scandal and decides to seek an illegal abortion. One relative, however, Aunt Rosamond, played by Samantha Bond, knows about the liaison and resulting pregnancy. She's aghast at the thought of abortion, knowing the evil involved and the possible effects on Edith. Nevertheless, she accompanies her niece to the seedy clinic of the doctor who was supposed to solve the problem. But when Edith hears the heartfelt cry of a desperate woman in the next room, she comes to her senses and leaves. She subsequently travels to Switzerland under a pretext, bears the child and adopts her out. Thanks to a brave mother and supportive aunt, a little girl survives to see the light of day. Unhappily, over the past century, as our civilization moved from clandestine abortions and widespread adoption to open abortion and closed orphanages, termination rates have spiraled. Of course, there are still courageous mums like Edith in our tale, or like the real-life Thai woman, Pataramrund Jarantha, whose story made the news last year. You'll recall that an Australian couple had commissioned her to be surrogate mother to their twins, only to pressure her to have an abortion when one tested imperfect. When she refused because of her Buddhist beliefs, they took the daughter Pipa back to Australia and demanded a refund for her brother, baby Gammy. The Thai surrogate is now raising the abandoned Down syndrome baby herself. Sadly, such courage and idealism seems to be in decline. We all know and love someone who has had an abortion, whether we realise it or not, because we are talking about 1 in 4 Australian women. Women in every family, community, workplace and church. They are not necessarily selfish or cruel. Often they lack the internal resources, the aunt or moral community to support them in making a life-affirming choice. The problem is in large part with the culture. Today's Australian culture tolerates a situation that leaves more than 80,000 tiny corpses each year. Women wounded psychologically or spiritually, and our healthcare and legal professions deeply compromised. Hardly anyone thinks this is a good thing. Yet people have been rendered insensitive by the sheer scale and regularity of it, silent for fear of being thought to be benighted or fanatic. A few years ago, a philosopher friend of mine, who, though non-Christian, shared many of my ideals, told me he thought Catholics, from the Pope down, didn't believe their own rhetoric about the preciousness of every human life from conception. If they did, he said, they couldn't think signing the occasional petition was doing enough. It was a challenging thought. But before we wag fingers of judgment at the women or the bystanders, we have to get a handle on what is really at issue here. In his great encyclical, The Gospel of Life, St. John Paul II observed that when a society loses its sense of God, it quickly loses its sense of man as well. When we lose sight of the transcendent source of human dignity, of human life, we are less likely to take seriously that life, that inviolable dignity. Then, as Pope Francis keeps pointing out, throwaway societies like ours will treat unborn babies and handicapped people, elderly people, unemployed or refugee or otherwise unwanted people as disposable. If even those who call themselves Christian live from day to day as practical atheists, as if God has no real purchase on their lives, if even we have forgotten God, we can't expect others to remember him and live by his law. So we come back again and again to be challenged by the Scriptures, absolved in reconciliation, nourished by the Eucharist, and sent out to our neighbours in need. Only that kind of communion with Christ can sustain a joyful and compassionate gospeling, such as we are called to offer our world. When St. John Paul called Christians to be the people of life and for life, he pulled no punches about the moral evil of abortion. But he had nothing but words of sympathy for the women who'd been through that tragedy, calling them back into the loving embrace of the Church, insisting that no sin is unforgivable, telling them to repent and then hope that their little one is safe with God and that they will be reconciled with both. He understood, as Pope Francis does, as loving Christians everywhere do, the pressures people are under, that pregnant women are always vulnerable, often desperate, and sometimes under duress. They understood, as we must, that people are only likely to make better choices in the context of a moral community and culture that supports better choices, that reverences every life as the image of God, that puts the weakest first and supports those who are struggling. Recently, the Canadian John Vanier, aged 86, was awarded the Templeton Prize, a sort of Nobel Prize for religion. He has been an untiring advocate for people with disabilities. What began quietly in northern France in 1964, when Vanier invited two intellectually disabled men to come and live with him as friends, has now grown into 147 large residential communities operating in 35 countries, including our own. and more than 1,500 faith and light support groups. It is a living testament to the message of our readings today. Looking forward, as our first reading does, to an all-inclusive brotherhood in which the least, no less than the greatest, are valued as the Lord's own, and in which the divine law written on the heart is observed by all. The L'Arche movement joins our Passion-Tide Lord in our epistle today, offering up prayer and entreaty aloud and in silent tears on behalf of suffering humanity. As Jesus approaches that moment where he will be lifted up and will draw all people to himself, we witness him founding a new humanity that will honour and value every member as a unique and irreplaceable child of God. At the coming feast of the Annunciation, we too must join the frightened Virgin in saying fiat, yes, to life, to every human life, unique and irreplaceable, to divine life, creating and redeeming and inspiring, for every person, young or old, anxious or ashamed. From the Annunciation through to the Passion and beyond to Easter, we know that if we are to build a civilization of life and love with Christ, we too must say a Marian fiat, yes, to God, who is the author of life and love.